What is the difference between anger and trauma, and why do churches mess this up all the time? Hi, I'm Shane, a former pastor who believes that you don't need the church to have good spirituality and faith. So the first big difference I see between anger and trauma is that anger is a response that often reacts and projects outward, while trauma sort of inverts inward. So like you could say that anger speaks, trauma flinches, if that makes sense. Anger is going to be like, I'm not okay with this needs to change in the very nicest terms. Trauma is going to say, I'm not safe here, right? So the biggest difference between anger and trauma, as I see it, is that anger does tend to project outward, where trauma is a response that projects inward. And trauma can bring anger, but oftentimes it also brings silence. I guess anger can bring silence too, but then it's a seething rage, and eventually it's gonna blow up, right? But again, it's that response to the event itself, whereas in trauma is something that is like, if you've ever seen like an abused dog, right? That's trauma, right? If you go to pet an abused dog, it's gonna flinch. Whereas if you, now, that's usually the case. You get enough trauma over enough amount of time, and there's a good chance that dog might bite too. And that's not anger, that's biting. And so that's part of the reason why the church has a problem with conflating anger and trauma, because sometimes if you've been traumatized long enough, that will manifest. It'll finally sort of maybe explode in some ways that are harmful to the others around you. And then so people are like, why are you so mad? When in reality, you've been traumatized for so long that now it's responsive in anger. But it's usually much more than anger. At that point, it's rage. It is beyond just being angry. Like my son spills milk all over the counter after being told to be careful, right? That can bring anger, but I'm not going to like burn down the house with it. Trauma, completely different. Also, the church never likes to own up to the fact that it can do either make people angry or bring them trauma, but especially that second one, even though it's really, really good at bringing the trauma. And so closely related to that is the second idea that anger is about what happened and trauma is about what keeps happening. Anger does not linger, generally speaking, even if it's not like a bottle rocket where it's a flash and boom and gone. Anger can be processed through without external help, right? My son spills that milk. Like, yeah, him apologizing might help, but ultimately, I don't even need that to know that eventually, soon, not long after, I'm going to be like, okay, fine, whatever, we'll just deal with it, right? But trauma, it lingers. And that's especially true if the person who was traumatized was not allowed to process or heal, or if that trauma was trivialized or marginalized or ignored altogether. The person was made to feel stupid about it. A really, really good example of this is how the church treats people who are queer or advocates of the LGBTQ plus community. What you'll see here, and this is especially true in this case, but all over the place, is the church teaches a thing or it hammers home a thing. It really is ugly and hateful. And then when somebody comes out as queer, they are not only just dismissed or marginalized, but sometimes they're told even that they're evil. They're going actively against God. And so not only is that event a response for anger, but then it keeps going because now they're instilling this idea that they are the problem. And so they don't get to heal, they don't get to process, they only get to keep internalizing this thing that is carrying through. And let's say they even get to leave the church. Let's just say that as a response to that, they leave the church. That's still, those thoughts, those ideas are still internalized and they still carry on. And it will take time to process and heal through that. And you're just not gonna get over it. So if you've ever seen somebody who's angry about something and they continue to be angry or hurt or sad or depressed or whatever about something, and you're like, man, why can't you just get over that? Maybe it's because they're traumatized and they haven't been allowed or able to have the space to heal or to feel acknowledged or heard or any of those things that come along with what is necessary to heal trauma. And finally, one of the things that the church just doesn't understand is that being angry is not necessarily a bad thing, right? The Gospels talk about Jesus being angry, but even beyond that, the church has a real problem with discomfort. And so when they see people angry, they feel like they're falling short or they're not doing what they're supposed to do. They're being, they're causing discord. They're tearing up the unity, all that. You've heard all the platitudes. But the reality is that anger is important and it can be very, very useful in the healing process. In fact, I don't think that any trauma is fully healed unless you have processed through the anger, not around it. You do not process trauma with anger avoidance. You have to be angry about something that happened there, or else you're really not allowing yourself to experience the fullness of it. Also, trauma, while it can invite anger as a part of the healing process, that expression, just being angry about stuff, doesn't help. It doesn't help by itself. Traumatized people need safety in order to process that anger appropriately. And the church is often the least safe place for traumatized people to express their anger in a safe manner, because they're almost always going to be met by somebody who tells them they need to just get over it, or nobody's perfect, or any of the other bullshit ways that a church rationalizes its own culpability in the traumatizing process. And so while traumatized people do need to process anger, they need to do so in a safe way. So anger and trauma don't cancel each other out. They often work together. But again, anger is not a lingering thing. Especially in terms of trauma, it is a thing that comes out of the healthy healing process of trauma. But you need that safety place to be able to do that. And the church can be, but it oftentimes isn't. Especially, you're never going to find safety within the organization that caused you to be traumatized in the first place. So that's the other thing. You cannot expect the person to heal in the place where they got hurt. If a child is going through domestic abuse at home, a parental abuse, child abuse at home, you can't expect them to find that peace and that comfort in the home. They're going to have to find it elsewhere. I know this firsthand. I wasn't fully physically abused, although you could make the argument that there was some of that there, but it really was mostly around having drunk parents who were also doing some drugs and stuff at the time. A lot of mental, verbal abuse going on there. Going there and trying to make that be the place where that trauma was deconstructed and rebuilt into something better. No, that just wasn't going to happen. So I had to go elsewhere. And that we see that all over in lots of systems, in lots of places in our country, in the church, everywhere. So the church conflates anger and trauma because they can be linked, but they're not the same thing. And that is, in my opinion, the difference. Anger is an event. Trauma is something that's still happening, and anger can be a part of the traumatizing or the trauma rebuilding process. But so y'all go find some people that don't want anything from you and try to find some love there. Take care.